Imagine an Africa so abundant that our skies, our lands, our hearts overflow with possibility, yet we send our youth abroad in search of what already belongs to us. Today I say I do not want my people to uproot themselves, chasing greener pastures across deserts and oceans. Africa is the richest continent on earth, not in some distant dream, but in reality. Our problem is not a lack of resources, it is our failure to harness them. Armwoodopinion.com, dailyblast.com. We must awaken to our own potential, channel our talents, our energy, our creativity back into our communities. We must say enough to the lie that opportunity lives only overseas. When we invest in our farms, in our schools, in our factories, in our cities, we will build the societies we so deeply deserve. We will produce the food that nourishes us, the technology that empowers us, the art and culture that defines us. This fight is not against any single nation, it is against dependency. We must refuse to be silent when our land is plundered, our minds commodified, our destinies mapped by others. Let us reclaim our wealth, natural and human, for the benefit of our people. In doing so, we lift ourselves and our children. We offer hope where there was despair, dignity where there was humiliation, and sovereignty where there was subordination. Yes, the path ahead demands courage. It demands sacrifice. It demands vision. But we owe it to our ancestors who laid the foundation. We owe it to the unborn, whose futures rest on our shoulders. And we owe it to ourselves, every mother, every father, every dreamer, to reclaim what is ours, a land rich not merely in resources, but rich in promise. So rise, build, thrive, stay, not because you cannot go, but because here is where your roots are strongest. Here is where your hands can shape the future. Here is where Africa begins, with you. Africa is rich in resources. The continent is blessed with a vast array of natural wealth, from fertile land and abundant water sources to vast mineral deposits, energy reserves, forests, and biodiversity. Yet despite this immense abundance, Africa continues to grapple with underdevelopment, poverty, and economic instability. This contradiction raises a troubling and persistent question. How can a land so full of potential still remain at the margins of global development? The answer lies not in the lack of resources, but in the failure to properly utilize, manage, and control them for the benefit of its people. For decades, Africa has exported its raw materials, oil, gold, diamonds, cobalt, cocoa, timber, and more to the rest of the world, often without adding value to these resources. In return, it imports expensive finished goods, perpetuating a cycle of dependency and economic imbalance. The wealth leaves the continent while the benefits accrue elsewhere. This pattern, deeply rooted in colonial legacies and reinforced by modern global trade systems, continues to drain Africa of its most valuable assets. Mismanagement is a central part of the problem. Many African nations lack the infrastructure, governance systems, and industrial capacity needed to process and maximize the value of their resources. Corruption, political instability, and poor planning further compound the issue. In some cases, the very people entrusted with managing national wealth become obstacles to progress, prioritizing personal or foreign interests over the needs of the public. Resource-rich regions have often become zones of conflict rather than engines of growth, as competing groups fight for control and foreign corporations exploit weak regulatory environments to operate unchecked. Moreover, the continent's resource wealth has not translated into broad-based prosperity. Large portions of the population remain excluded from the economic benefits of extraction and trade. Rural communities where mining or oil drilling occurs often suffer from environmental degradation, displacement, and lack of investment in local development. The revenues generated are rarely reinvested into public services like education, healthcare, or infrastructure. Instead of lifting people out of poverty, resource wealth has too often deepened inequality and fostered a culture of dependence on external aid and multinational corporations. Yet this situation is not irreversible. Africa's resource wealth remains a powerful lever for change if it is harnessed strategically and with the right vision. This begins with African governments and institutions taking firm control of their national assets, renegotiating exploitative contracts, enforcing environmental protections, and demanding greater value addition within their borders. The continent must develop strong local industries that can process raw materials, create jobs, and retain more wealth within national economies. Educational and vocational training systems should be aligned with the demands of a modern, resource-driven economy to ensure that young Africans are equipped to lead in sectors like agriculture, mining, manufacturing, and renewable energy. Transparency and accountability must also become non-negotiable. Citizens must know how their resources are being used, where revenues are going, and who is benefiting. Governments should be held to higher standards by their people and supported in building institutions that serve the public interest rather than narrow elites. African unity and cooperation across borders can further strengthen bargaining power and reduce the vulnerability of individual nations to external pressure or exploitation. Africa does not need to remain trapped in a pattern of exporting raw materials and importing poverty. Its future lies in building a system where resources are a blessing for all, not just a few. With courageous leadership, strategic investment, and active civic engagement, Africa's natural wealth can become the foundation for a new era of development, dignity, and self-reliance. Migration should not be the solution. Across the African continent, millions of young people feel compelled to leave their countries, risking their lives across deserts and seas, chasing opportunities in foreign lands. These journeys are often fueled by desperation rather than hope, driven by a lack of employment, political instability, poor education systems, and an overwhelming sense that their future lies elsewhere. But this should not be the reality. Africans should not have to abandon their homes in search of dignity and opportunity. The truth is that prosperity is possible right here on African soil, if only the continent's vast resources are used wisely and fairly. The current wave of migration is not born out of laziness or a lack of ambition. It is born out of structural failure. When young people do not see any path forward, when they face limited job prospects, crumbling infrastructure, and governments that are either unwilling or unable to address their needs, they begin to believe that success can only be found abroad. They leave behind families, languages, cultures, and a deep sense of identity, hoping that somewhere else they might find what their own countries have denied them. But this pattern represents a deep loss for the continent. Every skilled worker, every entrepreneur, every student who leaves contributes to the weakening of Africa's potential. Instead of pouring talent into foreign economies, African nations must find ways to retain and nurture it. This begins with reimagining development from the ground up. Jobs must be created not through handouts or short-term schemes, but through long-term investment in industries that can grow and sustain themselves. Agriculture, renewable energy, technology, manufacturing, and education are all sectors that can absorb and empower the youth. When governments prioritize the development of these sectors and when local businesses are supported and protected, young people can begin to see a future where they are. Moreover, public trust must be rebuilt. Many people leave not just because of economic reasons, but because they have lost faith in their leaders. They feel that their voices do not matter, that corruption reigns, and that the system is rigged against them. Changing this perception requires accountability, transparency, and genuine efforts to include citizens in national planning and decision-making. Governments must serve the people, not just the powerful. They must create systems where everyone, regardless of background or connections, has a fair shot at building a life of purpose and stability. Education is also key. A well-educated population is not only more likely to contribute to national development, but also more likely to believe in their capacity to do so. Education must be aligned with real-world opportunities, equipping students not only with degrees, but with practical skills and the mindset to innovate, lead, and solve problems. African youth should be taught that they are not just participants in their societies, but future builders of them. The narrative of escape must be replaced with one of investment. investment in themselves, in their communities, and in their nations. This is not to say that movement across borders should be condemned. Migration, when voluntary and well supported, can bring cultural exchange, economic benefits, and global connection. But it should not be a last resort. It should not be the only hope for a better life. Africans should have the choice to stay because there are opportunities at home, not because they are trapped. The continent must reach a point where staying is not a sacrifice but a statement of pride, ambition, and possibility. The land is rich, the people are capable. What is needed now is the leadership, the unity, and the vision to make home the most attractive option for every young African dreaming of a better future. Self-reliance is essential. Ibrahim Traoré's call to the African people is not just a political statement, but a powerful reminder of the continent's long-standing struggle with dependency, a condition that has limited growth, stifled innovation, and left many nations vulnerable to exploitation. For decades, African countries have looked outward for development models, financial assistance, technical expertise, and even basic goods and services. This external dependence has created a dangerous cycle where progress is tied to the will, interests, and timing of others, rather than being driven by the people themselves. Traoré challenges this mindset by urging Africans to rediscover their own strength, talent, and potential. Depending on foreign aid and external intervention has not brought lasting prosperity. It may have filled temporary gaps or brought momentary relief, but it has not built the kind of sustainable, inclusive systems needed to transform nations. On the contrary, it has often led to loss of sovereignty, debt traps, and economic structures shaped by external agendas. This approach does not empower people, it weakens them. When nations rely on others to feed their people, build their roads, run their industries, or educate their children, they lose control of their future. True independence is not just about waving a flag or electing a government. It is about ownership of ideas, resources, solutions, and direction. Traoré's message is that Africa already possesses the human capital, the natural wealth, and the cultural resilience to stand on its own feet. What is needed is belief in that truth and the will to act on it. Across the continent, there are millions of skilled workers, creative thinkers, determined entrepreneurs, and hard-working citizens. These people must be at the center of Africa's development vision, not pushed aside in favor of foreign consultants or imported technologies. Local industries must be developed, supported, and protected. Africa cannot continue to be a market for other people's goods while exporting raw materials that return as expensive finished products. From agriculture to technology, manufacturing to energy, the focus must shift towards self-sufficiency. This does not mean isolation or rejection of cooperation. It means setting priorities based on African interests, using African brains and African hands. It means encouraging innovation within the continent and supporting local businesses that create jobs, build infrastructure, and generate wealth that stays within communities. Self-reliance also requires investment in education and research. African universities and training centers should be funded and equipped to produce knowledge that responds to local challenges. Whether it is agriculture adapted to the local climate, medicine rooted in traditional and modern science, or technology that solves uniquely African problems, the solutions must come from within. The continent must build a generation that not only consumes ideas, but creates them. People who do not ask what others can do for them, but what they can do with what they already have. Leadership is also crucial. Those in power must embody the values of service, integrity, and vision. They must reject the temptation of foreign praise at the expense of national interests. True leaders listen to their people, invest in their potential, and work toward systems that empower citizens rather than trap them in dependency. This is not just a government responsibility, it is a societal shift that must involve educators, business leaders, artists, youth, and elders alike. Traoré's call is ultimately one of dignity. To be self-reliant is to walk with pride, to know that you are not helpless, that your future does not depend on charity but on your own hands and minds. Africa has everything it needs to rise. The time to depend on others has passed. The time to believe in ourselves and to act with courage, unity, and purpose is now. Dependency must end. Ibrahim Traoré speaks with urgency when he addresses the issue of foreign influence and exploitation in Africa. His message is clear. As long as African nations remain dependent on external powers for their economic growth, political stability, and basic services, they will never experience true freedom or development. The legacy of colonialism did not end with the departure of foreign flags. It simply changed form. Today, through economic structures, multinational corporations, foreign aid, and even military arrangements, many African countries continue to operate under systems shaped by outside interests. This, Traoré argues, must stop if the continent is ever to claim full control over its destiny. The ongoing exploitation of Africa's natural resources is one of the most visible symptoms of this dependency. Vast quantities of minerals, oil, timber, and agricultural products are extracted from the continent every year, yet the wealth they generate rarely benefits the local population. Foreign companies, often backed by powerful governments, negotiate unfair contracts that leave African countries with a fraction of the profits. The infrastructure built around these industries frequently serves export routes rather than local development, and the jobs created are often low-paying or unsustainable. Meanwhile, the environmental and social costs of these activities are left behind, impacting the communities whose land and lives are affected. Foreign aid, while presented as a form of support, also reinforces dependency. Aid can be a tool for relief in times of crisis, but when it becomes a long-term substitute for domestic investment and local solutions, it undermines initiative and accountability. Some governments, conditioned to rely on donor funding, prioritize projects based on donor agendas rather than national needs. This distorts policy-making and weakens democratic governance. Traore challenges this model, asserting that Africa must move from being a recipient of solutions to being the generator of its own. Another form of dependency lies in military and political arrangements. In several countries, foreign military presence is justified in the name of security or counterterrorism. But too often, these arrangements serve strategic interests that have little to do with African stability and everything to do with external power dynamics. The continent must not allow its land to become a battleground for other nations' geopolitical games. Security, like development, must come from within, through well-trained, well-equipped, and well-leaded national forces accountable to the people they protect. Ending dependency does not mean cutting ties with the world. Africa can and should engage globally, but on equal terms. Sovereignty means having the power to negotiate, to set conditions, to protect national interests, and to say no when a deal does not serve the people. It means building regional cooperation so that African nations can present a united front in international negotiations, thereby increasing their leverage and defending their shared interests. True sovereignty also requires internal reform. Leaders must reject corruption, nepotism, and short-term thinking. They must work to build transparent systems, invest in institutions, and prioritize long-term strategies that put people before profit. National policies must reflect the aspirations of citizens rather than the conditions of lenders or foreign advisors. Education systems must be rooted in African realities and values, producing generations who think critically, act ethically, and believe in the possibility of a self-determined future. Dependency robs people of agency. It teaches them that they cannot survive or succeed without someone else's help. Traore urges a rejection of this lie. Africa is not helpless, it is not broken, it is not destined to remain under the control of others. With unity, courage, and vision, it can rise, not as a client of global powers, but as a proud and independent contributor to the world. The end of dependency marks the beginning of dignity, and that is a future worth building. Investment in local development is the key. For Africa to achieve lasting growth, stability, and dignity, the focus must shift toward building from within. Traore's vision is one of self-determined progress, rooted in the belief that the foundation for Africa's success lies not in foreign aid or borrowed systems, but in strengthening its own sectors, especially agriculture, education, infrastructure, and technology. These pillars form the backbone of any thriving society, and unless they are built up locally, Africa will continue to lag behind despite its immense potential. Agriculture remains the primary livelihood for a majority of Africans, yet the sector is often underfunded, underdeveloped, and undervalued. With the right investment in tools, training, irrigation, storage, and market access, agriculture can become a powerful engine for job creation, food security, and rural development. Farmers should not be stuck in cycles of subsistence or dependency on imported food. They must be empowered with modern techniques, access to credit, and infrastructure that connects them to regional and global markets. Food sovereignty begins when local producers are equipped to feed their own communities. Investment in agriculture also protects against external shocks and reduces the reliance on foreign imports that often strain national budgets. Education is another cornerstone. It is not just about building more schools, but about improving the quality of learning and making it relevant to the needs of African societies. An education system should prepare young people to be thinkers, builders, and leaders, not just job seekers. Traore emphasizes the importance of education that encourages critical thinking, innovation, and pride in one's heritage. Technical and vocational training must be expanded to align with the demands of modern economies. Students must graduate with the ability to start businesses, develop new technologies, and solve local problems. Education must also include civic awareness so that young Africans grow up understanding their rights, responsibilities, and the importance of participating in democratic governance. Infrastructure is another essential area that demands local investment. Roads, electricity, water systems, transportation networks, and internet access are not luxuries, they are basic requirements for any economy to function efficiently. Without reliable infrastructure, farmers cannot get their goods to market, students cannot study effectively, and businesses cannot operate competitively. Yet too often, infrastructure projects are designed by and for external contractors with little long-term benefit to the local population. African governments must take the lead in designing infrastructure that meets local needs and is maintained through local expertise and employment. Public infrastructure built with public interest in mind strengthens communities and stimulates private sector growth. Technology and innovation must also be central to Africa's development strategy. The digital revolution is transforming economies worldwide, and Africa cannot afford to be left behind. However, the solution is not simply to import foreign technology, but to develop homegrown digital solutions that respond to African realities. Mobile banking, e-banking, and e-learning tools are already proving how local innovation can meet critical needs. Governments should invest in research and development, support tech hubs, and create environments where young inventors and entrepreneurs can thrive. Technology can break down barriers and create opportunities, but only when it is accessible and locally driven. Local development means building an economy from the ground up, by and for the people who live in it. It means trusting that Africans themselves know what is best for their communities when they are given the tools, resources, and support to lead the way. Traoré's message is a rejection of the idea that solutions must come from outside. Instead, he calls for a return to self-belief, self-investment, and self-determination. When African countries prioritize their own people and invest in their own development, they are not just building roads and schools, they are building dignity, resilience, and a future that belongs to them. The future of Africa depends on its people. This truth lies at the heart of Ibrahim Traoré's vision for a self-reliant, sovereign, and prosperous continent. No external force, government, or institution will ever care about Africa's development as deeply or as genuinely as its own citizens. Every African, regardless of age, status, or background, holds a share in the responsibility of shaping the continent's destiny. Staying, working, and believing in the potential of one's homeland is not only a personal decision, but also a bold act of patriotism and leadership. For too long, the dominant narrative around Africa has been one of dependency, conflict, and crisis. These images have been reinforced by the media, by historical injustices, and by continued global systems that benefit from Africa's weakness. But behind that narrative lies a deeper, often ignored truth: that Africa is full of promise, energy, and untapped brilliance. Its people are its greatest resource, and their commitment to change, if harnessed and united, is more powerful than any aid package or foreign intervention. The development of the continent does not rest solely in the hands of politicians or foreign investors. It begins with the everyday decisions made by ordinary people. Farmers who choose to apply new techniques to improve their yield, teachers who inspire their students to dream bigger, entrepreneurs who take risks to start local businesses, and youth who choose to stay and build rather than leave in search of uncertain futures abroad. Each action taken in support of the continent adds a brick to the foundation of a stronger Africa. There is an urgent need to cultivate a new sense of ownership and responsibility among African citizens. Too often, people feel powerless in the face of corrupt leadership or structural inequality. But waiting for perfect conditions or ideal leaders is a delay tactic that Africa can no longer afford. Change begins at the community level, in homes, schools, markets, and local councils. It comes when individuals step up, challenge injustice, demand accountability, and serve their communities with dedication. Leadership is not only about holding office, it is about influence, example, and service. A mother who raises children with strong values is a leader. A youth who teaches others a skill is a leader. Staying in one's country and working for its progress must no longer be seen as a sign of limitation or failure. Instead, it should be regarded as a badge of courage and hope. Those who build Africa from within often do so in the face of significant obstacles: limited infrastructure, slow institutions, and a culture that sometimes undervalues local potential. Yet it is precisely this commitment that will shift the tides. When more Africans decide to stay, to create, to invest, and to lead, the continent becomes more resilient and self-sustaining. This does not mean rejecting the outside world. Diaspora communities play an important role in transferring skills, sending remittances, and connecting Africa to global networks. But the core strength of any nation lies in its people's belief in themselves and in the possibility of a better future at home. That belief fuels action, and action creates change. Africa's development will not come from copying foreign models, but from building systems that reflect the continent's realities, values, and dreams. Traore's message is both a challenge and a call to hope. Africa's potential is real, but it will only be realized when Africans themselves take the lead. This means refusing to be passive observers of their own fate and instead becoming active agents of transformation. The future is not something to be awaited, it is something to be built, piece by piece, by those who dare to believe that Africa belongs to its people and its destiny lies in their hands.